Ever get the feeling that history is like, well, kind of like watching a movie? We get caught up in the battles and the big events, but sometimes, you know, we miss why things went down the way they did.
It's true.
That's why I'm really looking forward to this deep dive on World War II.
Yeah.
Your sources, they've got me thinking, like, there's always more to the story, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So ready to rewind the clock back to one of the biggest turning points in history.
Let's do it. World War II is one of those events so pivotal.
Totally.
And what's interesting is it wasn't just like someone flipped a switch and bam, war. It was more this like chain reaction.
Oh, okay.
One thing leads to another. To really understand it, we got to go back to the aftermath of World War I.
Okay, so back to the Treaty of Versailles. I always thought that was supposed to ensure peace, like never again kind of thing.
Right. That was the hope, the intention.
Oh.
But it's like they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right?
So how did a treaty designed to prevent war end up contributing to another one?
Well, imagine this. Germany, they get slapped with the blame for the whole thing.
Yeah.
Forced to pay these huge reparations, had to give up land. It crippled them. Created this breeding ground for resentment, economic instability. Not a good mix.
Yeah, that's like a recipe for, well, for extremism to take hold.
Exactly. And boom, enter Hitler, Mussolini, Hirohito, ambitious, hungry for power, and each with their own, well, messed up ideology.
And scary thing is, they all kind of hit their stride around the same time.
It's like a perfect storm brewing. You've got these charismatic leaders with, let's face it, some radical solutions. And people, they were desperate for change.
So how did the rest of the world react to these, well, these emerging threats? Because our sources talk about this idea of appeasement, which on the surface sounds kind of reasonable. Like, hey, let's avoid another war at all costs, right?
On paper, sure, it sounds good, right? Keep the
Yeah.
peace. But looking back, it was a huge gamble. It backfired big time.
The Munich Agreement is a prime example of that, right? When Britain and France basically let Hitler take part of Czechoslovakia, hoping he'd be satisfied.
Exactly. Appeasement, in this case, it just emboldened Hitler. Showed him that, hey, the world's willing to make concessions to avoid a fight.
So instead of stopping him, they kind of gave him the green light to keep pushing?
It's like they say, give an inch, he takes a mile. And unfortunately, in this case, it was more like, give a country, he'll take, well, a whole lot more.
And that takes us right to the brink of the deadliest conflict in human history. And then it's 1939, Germany invades Poland, and just like that, World War II explodes onto the scene.
It's a pivotal moment.
And from what I'm seeing in these sources, Germany didn't just, like, join the party. They brought this whole new way of fighting.
Yeah, Blitzkrieg.
Blitzkrieg, right. What exactly was that? Was it really as, like, shocking as they say?
Oh, it absolutely lived up to the name, which, means lightning war for a reason. It was all about speed and overwhelming force. I mean, we're talking tanks, troops, air power, all coordinated, hitting hard and fast before the enemy even knew what hit them.
So like those old war movies, but for real.
Yeah. Think about the invasion of France. They were caught totally off guard.
Yeah, how fast were the Germans moving, really?
They were covering, get this, like 50 miles a day.
50 miles a day.
Unheard of at that time.
Yeah.
And that speed, that coordination, it's what allowed them to take France in, like, 6 weeks.
6 weeks. That's incredible, really. I mean, it's terrifying, but incredible.
Oh, absolutely. Blitzkrieg was a game changer. But the thing is, World War II, it wasn't just confined to one battlefield. This thing went global.
Right, right. We've got to talk about the two major fronts, Europe and the Pacific. What were some of the key differences there?
Well, for starters, the sheer scale of the fighting in Europe was just massive. Millions and millions of soldiers clashing across vast distances.
Yeah, our sources mention Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's big gamble to take on the Soviet Union.
Which turned out to be a huge miscalculation. He sent over 3 million German soldiers into the Soviet Union, largest invasion force in history at that point.
3 million. That's just mind-blowing. And I remember reading that the fighting on the Eastern Front was just brutal.
Oh, absolutely. It was a war of attrition, unlike anything seen before. Millions died in those battles. And Stalingrad, that was a turning point.
Stalingrad. I've always found that battle particularly haunting. What made it so significant?
It was a meat grinder.
Yeah.
This brutal, months-long siege. Imagine street fighting, house by house, the city reduced to rubble.
It's a nightmare.
The Germans, they suffered huge losses there. And their defeat in early 43, well, it marked the beginning of their long retreat westward.
Wow. And while all this is happening in Europe, there's a whole other war going on in the Pacific. And I'm seeing that naval warfare was changing dramatically with the rise of, like, aircraft carriers.
Yeah, the Pacific, that's where aircraft carriers really came into their own. They changed the whole game. Well, they were like these mobile air bases, right? So suddenly, you could strike hundreds of miles inland, attack enemy fleets far beyond the reach of traditional battleships. It was a game changer for naval strategy.
So it's not just about big guns anymore.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And while Pearl Harbor gets a lot of attention, and rightfully so, it was really the carrier battles that decided who ruled the waves in the Pacific.
Like Midway.
Exactly. Midway was a turning point. The U.S. Navy, even though they were outnumbered, they managed to inflict a decisive defeat on the Japanese fleet. Sank 4 of their carriers.
So the carriers in one battle.
It was a huge blow to Japan's ability to wage war in the Pacific.
It's crazy to think about all these different battles, all these different parts of the world, all connected in this one massive conflict.
It really shows you the global scale of World War II.
And it's easy to get caught up in the battles and the strategies, but we can't forget about the human cost of it all. I mean, we're talking tens of millions of lives lost.
It's staggering. World War II resulted in an estimated 40 to 85 million civilian deaths alone.
Those numbers are just unimaginable. And it wasn't just soldiers on battlefields. Civilians were caught in the crossfire on a scale never seen before.
It's one of the tragedies of total war, that line between the home front and the battlefield. It gets blurred and innocent people suffer.
It's just, wow, the human cost is almost impossible to wrap your head around. And it wasn't just on those battlefields, right? Like World War II, it upended life for pretty much everyone.
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Millions of men off fighting, which meant women, they had to step up back home in ways they never had before.
Yeah, I mean, Rosie the Riveter, that image is iconic for a reason.
Right. But it went way beyond just factories.
Oh, I bet it. What other kinds of jobs were women taking on?
Everything. You name it. Running shipyards, operating all this heavy machinery, managing teams, even cracking codes. They kept entire industries going. It really challenged those old ideas about what women could and couldn't do.
I can only imagine how tough it must have been, too. I mean, dealing with all that pressure, the uncertainty of the war, and then having to prove themselves in these new roles.
For sure, it was an era of massive change and adaptation. And on top of the whole workforce shift, there was rationing, propaganda. Daily life was totally different.
Rationing, yeah, that always seems so hard to get used to. Like, what kind of stuff was rationed?
Pretty much everything essential. Food, obviously, sugar, meat, butter, but also gasoline, clothing, even metal was rationed. Can you imagine?
Wow, that's wild.
People had to make do with so much less, be super resourceful. It created this sense of, like, everyone's in it together. We got to sacrifice.
And the propaganda, that was everywhere back then, too. Right?
Oh, yeah. It was everywhere. Posters, radio broadcasts, movies, governments using every trick in the book to shape how people thought about the war, boost morale, demonize the enemy.
So powerful, though, right? Like, just imagine you're going about your day and you're surrounded by these messages.
Constantly bombarded. It was a total immersion experience. You couldn't escape it.
It's one thing to read about it, but to actually live through it, it must have been a completely different world.
It really was. But amidst all that, all the changes, the sacrifices, there's this incredibly dark chapter we have to confront, the Holocaust.
Yeah. It's just a horrific reminder of how cruel we can be to each other. And the sources, they make it clear this wasn't just some random acts of prejudice. It was systematic, organized.
State-sponsored genocide. The Nazis, they twisted existing anti-Semitism, which was sadly nothing new, into this whole ideology that sought to justify the unthinkable. And they escalated it in stages.
Like, how so? How did it actually unfold?
Well, first, they stripped away Jews' rights, their businesses, their citizenship, everything. Then came the ghettos, forcing them into these overcrowded, isolated areas.
Trying to erase their very existence.
Exactly. And then you have the Einsatzgruppen mobile killing squads going from town to town, murdering Jews by the thousands.
It's hard to even fathom that kind of cruelty. And then, of course, the death camps.
The camps, they were the final stage of this horrific planned factories of death, designed to eliminate as many people as possible. 6 million Jewish people murdered.
It's just beyond words. And we have to remember, it wasn't just a number. Each one, a life, a story, a family, gone.
An entire culture, generations wiped out.
Yeah.
It's a loss that's impossible to measure.
It's essential to remember, to never forget. But amidst all that darkness, I mean, did any hope survive?
As humans, even in the darkest times, we find a way. There were individuals, entire communities even, who risked everything to hide and protect those being hunted by the Nazis.
Real-life heroes.
They were. And they remind us that even when faced with unimaginable evil, there's always hope. There's always that capacity for courage and compassion.
Those stories, they're so important to hold on to, especially when we're talking about something as devastating as World War II. But how do you even begin to rebuild after a global conflict like that? I mean, where do you even start?
Well, it was a long road, and it looked different for everyone. But on a global scale, World War II, it totally reshaped the world. Old powers crumbled, and two superpowers emerged from the ashes, the United States and the Soviet Union.
And that's what set the stage for the Cold War, right? That clash of ideologies, that tension that seemed to hang over everything.
Exactly. The world found itself kind of stuck in this, well, uneasy peace.
Yeah.
But even amidst that rivalry, there were attempts to create some sense of stability.
That's where the United Nations comes in, right?
Right. It was this idea born out of this shared desire to prevent another world war that maybe, just maybe, nations could work together to solve problems instead of just, well, fighting over them.
An ambitious goal, especially after everything that had just happened.
For sure. And it wasn't perfect, still isn't.
Yeah.
But it was a start, a commitment, at least in theory, to try something different.
And then there was the Marshall Plan. It was about rebuilding Europe, but from what I've read, it was also pretty strategic, given the whole Cold War backdrop.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
The U.S. pumping billions of dollars into war-torn European nations. It wasn't just about being nice. It was also about preventing the spread of Soviet influence, creating alliances.
Smart move. Rebuild and strengthen your side at the same time. But we can't forget about the elephant in the room. Or maybe the mushroom cloud. The atomic bomb changed everything.
No doubt about it. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they ushered in this whole new era, the atomic age.
And suddenly it wasn't just about winning wars, it was about preventing the complete destruction of, well, everything.
It was a terrifying new reality. We're still grappling with the implications of it today.
Right.
But, you know, for all the darkness, World War II also sparked incredible progress in technology, in social change. It pushed humanity forward in ways we're still feeling today.
It's crazy how something so destructive could also be, well, so transformative. We've covered a lot of ground, from the ashes of World War I right through to the dawn of the atomic age.
It's a lot to process, for sure.
It really is. To everyone listening, we hope this deep dive encourages you to keep digging, to explore those personal stories of resilience and courage, to grapple with the complexities of this conflict. Because World War II, it might be history, but its legacy, those ripples, we're still feeling them today.